So I want to thank you for doing this. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's always a joy when someone's willing to talk about the things that motivate them to do what they do, and it can be a very vulnerable space. And so I appreciate you being willing to share your inner workings because they seem really cool from the outside. They seem really fascinating. So thank you for being willing to be open.
Yes, well, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's a great chance to talk about myself and get some stuff out there. So thank you.
So I sent you over the questions and you've had a chance to look them over, and you've very graciously given me the opportunity to kick off. And there are a lot of things that really struck me in the bio that I read when I saw your work at the GEM Institute. The whole bio really jumped out at me as very up my alley. I'm a huge seeker of spiritual, physical communion. I love the spiritual, and I love seeing people willingly integrate the spiritual into their physical life, especially overtly. And a lot of what your bio read was really like music to my ears. So to dive straight in, you talk about believing that the spiritual realm is as real as the physical realm. And I want to know why you think that.
Yeah, I think that's something that has been ingrained deeply in my life in general. I think that's something that I grew up with and that my mom really believed strongly, and that was just ingrained deeply into my belief system. And I think it's one thing to be raised with that and have that ingrained in your belief system, but another thing to really believe it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And recently it's just been hearing stories from people, honestly, that has reaffirmed that belief and helped me to live more into that reality, I guess. I've just heard so many stories from people through church and whatnot and other avenues of literally physical healings, miracles, and things like this. And, strange stuff like words of affirmation. Someone will get a word for someone and they'll go up to them and they would tell them something that they have no way of knowing. And just so many stories of things like that. And I think for myself, there's been a few moments and a few really meaningful encounters, I guess you could say. One was this vision I had about a year ago, and it was just this really kind of beautiful vision in my mind, I guess, that kind of came out of nowhere. And it's hard to explain like where that comes from. Like I didn't try to conjure it up in my own head or anything like that. It just was there and kind of seeing things in my mind, I guess. And with that one, I can be a doubter. So I found myself like, immediately I was like, that was from God. Like it just wrecked me. Like it was so beautiful and just out of nowhere. Like there's no explanation for something like that. And then I found myself doubting it. And it was this, I don't need to get into the details on it, but it was kind of this vision of a vessel being filled up with water from above is the best way to summarize it, I guess. And I was doubting it, and it was my brother who kind of reaffirmed it at one point when I was doubting it the most. And it was just like so coincidental that it couldn't be a coincidence, I guess. And so there's been stuff like that. And mostly I think it's just, I know so many people who have either witnessed like physical healing firsthand or known people who have had it, and it's too much to not believe. And I think for me, it's just been a matter of letting myself believe these things more and more, and releasing the doubt, and just really living into that reality and believing that that is reality, that the spiritual realm is very real and that we're living in it.
I've had a lot of visions in my life. I think since I was very young, I have a very active imagination, so that just kind of lends itself to a very evocative inner landscape, you know, very peopled and detailed and occupied. But in addition to that, I have definitely had visions in my life that feel different. They feel that you can sense when you're imagining something or curating something in your mind versus when something comes to you and feels like it's been given to you. Or often, well, not often, but sometimes I'll go into a meditative state with a question that I have or something that I'm struggling with, and I will open myself up to an opportunity for a vision. And then it feels like there is a collaboration between me and spirit or whatever else, where I do feel a participant in the sort of vision I'm having, but then also things come into it that that I will follow and investigate. And I get what you mean. Doubt is it's a huge factor in life. Skepticism and doubt are really pernicious. I actually just recorded a podcast about this the other day, how it's really easy for people to become skeptical. I think it can feel really safe. And historically speaking, it's not always encouraged to be courageous around spirituality. There's a kind of, there are a few things. I think there's the sense of like, if this was disproven, the disappointment and the foolishness that you would feel is so frightening that easier not to believe, because you take such a huge risk in believing. The higher you go, the further you have to fall in a sense. But then there's also, and I don't know if you feel this way, but in our current world, the reality of mental health is a very serious factor. And I have been really frightened in the past by visions that I've had that, and not initially, I talk about this in other podcasts as well, but I have a brother who's schizophrenic, who lives in many different states of consciousness, and some of them are not good, and they're not helpful, and they're not something he has an ability to control without medication, without like an external influence. And before he became his illness manifested, and before he was diagnosed, I was so happy to be really like, oh my God, this spirit came to me, and you know, this thing that I saw, and I just felt so confident in that. And all of a sudden, after he got sick, I was like, what if this is just nothing? What if this is totally nonsense? Or what if this is dangerous? What if this is to believe in something coming up from me, even if there is external validation from a spiritual director or a friend or a community? That doubt can be really repetitive. So were those things factors in the doubt that you've experienced around your spirituality?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think so. I think there is some of that, like, is this even real? Like, am I just making this up? Like, I think those are always thoughts that creep in for sure. But, you know, I've started to believe more and more, like, our own imaginations are, you know, it's a miracle in and of itself. Like, that's truly something powerful, and it's divine in a sense. Like, it's something that is hard to explain and hard to prove. Like, why does the mind work? What creates the imagination? What allows it to run free? And so I think, like, thinking about it that way a little more, I don't know, like, life is the miracle itself, and like, I don't know, I don't think it has to be like anything too like grandiose or like crazy out of nowhere, like, to be like truly powerful and beyond ourselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think that what I'm hearing you say that I like and agree with is that if you kind of take a step back from making reality as rote as we make it every day, it in and of itself is shocking and massive. And the fact of human consciousness is still largely unexplained and baffling. And so why try to deny that or normalize it or resist when our realities become interesting or feel moving? Why resist that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at the same time, there are moments that are completely unexplainable, and I do believe those moments are from God. And it's a hard thing because, nothing beyond this realm can be proven, obviously, and there's no proof, and that's the beauty of it, I think. But it does leave area for doubt, for sure, if you let that doubt creep in and side with that doubt, I guess. And in your instance, I think with your brother, and that's scary stuff. Like the mind is a scary place, for sure, and it's a fine line that we walk every day, I guess, in the mind. And I don't know, it's hard to explain, like, where we go wrong in our minds and where we go right and where you draw that line. And it's good. You probably have more insight on that than I do, in terms of, I don't know, just an unhealthy mind, I guess you could say. And there's also so much beauty in it. I don't know. It's hard to put labels sometimes, I think, and because we all walk that line of what you might call schizophrenia, I guess, a little bit. Like, we all have imaginations and we all see things in our minds, I guess,
and
to
we
a
all
certain
hear,
extent.
Like different narratives in our minds. We have a pantheon of inner narratives going on all the time. Yeah.
So yeah, I think for me, I guess you could say I've gone through times in my life where I had a manic episode at one point in my life, and
me too.
I guess at that point you could say I was acting schizophrenically. So that was definitely a learning experience for me, and I think to a certain extent that helped me see, like, what is a healthy thought and what is an unhealthy thought, and which thoughts should you give your energy to and side with, I guess, is the best way to put it. And which thoughts should you let pass by, like, I guess is kind of a way to think about it. But
which I think is something that we all, again, I love what you're saying, and I've found myself in investigating mental health more intimately, both because of my own experiences and because of my family, and because I think just it's part of my journey through the world to be curious about these things. But we all have a varying degree of delusion. We have a varying degree of power. We have actually, I think, a lot of power. I think humans have way more power than we access on a day-to-day basis, generally speaking, in our minds, in the way that we think, and the ways that we choose to think, and the voices that we choose to, I'll say, endorse again, because I like that. I think that works.
Yeah.
Back and, like, fund and be like, yeah, that thing that I'm thinking, I'm attaching myself to it. Now it and me are synonymous, versus being like, that's a thought that popped up in my, like, on my hard drive, and I'm going to kind of just let it pass. Like, it's not relevant to me. And if it's troubling, I'm going to use the tools that I have to address the feeling. You kind of separate out thought from feeling, and then you self-soothe or assuage however you need to, and you dismiss the thought that doesn't feel relevant. But that does take a high level of functioning, I think. My God, I was doing the shower this morning. There are just so many moments where you're like, oh, I'm thinking this thing, and you audit and you're like, that's not very nice, or that's not helpful to me at all. That's actually like feels like something that's putting me down, or it's an unkind thought about another person. Why am I thinking those things? And I think not being fearful of our minds is also a practice of because I don't know about you, but I have felt in the past distraught by my lesser thoughts, it almost like disappointed in myself or sad or upset. And I think that's a mistake. I think that the mind is kind of like a catch-all in a lot of ways. And again, what you water will grow. So paying attention, even in distress, to a part of yourself that doesn't feel healthy still fuels that part of yourself versus sort of releasing and letting it go. And so I think the real difference, and it sounds like you've experienced this, and I certainly have. I think it was a manic episode. I mean, it certainly felt to me like mania. I was in 2020, and that was such an intense time in the world anyway, and I hadn't really processed my brother's illness. It all just started to happen so fast. He got ill. I did a lot of different things, went to Spain, moved to New York, was in college, and was really, really unhappy, but didn't really know how to do anything about that or address it. And I was like, smoking cigarettes and barely eating. And it hit this point where I was like, I feel so good in 2020. I didn't have to work. I got on unemployment. I could just do yoga and write and meditate, and it was great, but I was really unhealthy in my body. I wasn't taking care of my vessel at all. And I started feeling like I wasn't sleeping. I was like, I don't need food. I don't need any of this. And all of a sudden and I can remember the day where I was like, oh, this feels like it's teetering. And then it just crashed. And I went into a depressive episode that nearly took me out. Like I was almost like, okay, in fact, I was like, I'm good. I can't do this anymore, but I have more to do, so I'm here. But I was lucky, I think, in that I was able to right the ship. I had help for sure. Friends and family came through and were like, hey, we're going to help you out. But I think there are levels where we can do that on our own versus there's a more extreme version of that some people can't manage. And what I think is fascinating, and I love what you're saying, is like spirituality is somehow in all of it. Like my brother still is a very deep person. He's brilliant and rich, and his path is real and important. And it just happens to be a very uniquely challenging path. And I often find myself really humbled and baffled by that, and trying to understand how it plays in my own life. And I've kind of tangented here, but I just think that there's like a beauty to accepting all of those things as real and not being afraid of our own minds, but still being smart about them, to your point, and making sure that we're careful in how we choose to think.
Yeah, absolutely. The mind is a sort of muscle, and you can get on these trains of bad thoughts, and that can take you down some dark roads for sure. And it is something that, we have to work on managing and living with. And I think control of the mind is huge, and not necessarily controlling it, but just taking it for what it is. And it's a lot. And thoughts are thoughts, and that's pretty much all they are. They're not all meaningful or relevant to us. They're thoughts, and I think just observing them at times is one of the best things we can do.
To go back, would you share the vision that you had, the vessel being filled? Do you have a more detailed picture of that experience?
Yeah, I could share that. It was I was actually on vacation in Portugal, and I kind of made, which was
it's a good setting,
a real gift for sure. Yeah, it was a pleasure to be there. But I had been trying to make a practice of each morning on that trip, just kind of going out and praying in the morning. And so I was sitting on the patio of the place we were at, and I wasn't even really, I don't know, I wasn't even like that focused in my prayer. I just kind of was there, and all of a sudden I just kind of started seeing this picture in my mind of this little kind of clay like vase, little vessel kind of sitting on top of the earth, and there was water coming down from above it, and it wasn't really water but kind of like water, and it was filling up the vessel and overflowing into the earth. And yeah, I immediately just felt like I want to be that vessel for God's presence, like fill me up and let me overflow in the earth. Before then I had always, I don't know, I'd struggled with the fact like I want to do God's will, I want to do God's work, but it's like, what do I have to do? Like, like a doing mindset, like an achieving mindset kind of thing. And I received that picture, and it's like, you don't have to do anything, you just have to receive and be a vessel, and the rest will take care of itself. So it was this really beautiful picture that I think I needed to see, and it really got to me.
That's cool. It's it's very allowing and passive in a good way. It is a kind of a non-functioning or a non-over-functioning message. You don't have to do anything per se, other than simply exist. And what is it that when you say God's work, what is that work?
Well, I don't know exactly what that looks like. I think I'm still figuring that out for sure. But I explained that vision, and I think that's what I needed to see at that time. That's not what other people would need to see, but that's what I needed to receive, was just this, like, right now, all I need to do, or at that time, all I needed to do was just be present, just receive from God, and not worry about like what doing God's work looks like, I guess, at that time. Just first step is receiving and being immersed in God's presence, I guess you could say. So I don't know. I think love is key. Loving our neighbors is the first step to doing God's work. I think that's how Jesus summarized it in the Bible, and I think that really simplifies it for me. Is like love your neighbor as yourself. And I don't know exactly what that looks like in every aspect of everyday life, but I think it looks like sacrificing for the betterment of the people around us and doing what we can for the people around us, I think, is the simplest way to kind of look at it for me.
How do you feel about, and this is an off-the-cuff question, and it's not an easy question, but I like, I think Jesus as a spiritual figure in my sort of agnostic roster. I love his teachings, and definitely when I was a practicing Episcopalian when I was younger, resonated more with the New Testament than the Old Testament. I loved particularly about the character, the person of Jesus, or like that he was extremely democratic and would be with anyone. How do you approach that in your own life? Right now, we live in a time of so much division, in a way that scares me. And I almost find myself sometimes, being like, for example, I was at Goodwill the other day, and the man who checked us out had a tattoo that said "White Lives Matter," and I was like, all right, that isn't my, like, the whole lives matter thing was hard for me. I was like, I think that every life matters. I also think that systemic racism in our country is a big problem. So I'm like, we can't, a whole thing goes off in my head of like, oh my God, I have so many things I'm thinking and saying. And also, I don't know this person at all. And he's being really kind and helpful. And he's working at Goodwill. Who knows what his story is? We're just nice, and we interact, and we go on our merry way. And I don't really think much more of it, except like, I just sort of wonder about it. And then I went back to return something, and the woman checking me out looked at my receipt and was like, oh, it was this guy. I don't like him. And I was like, oh, and she's like, he has some really racist tattoos. And I, being me, was like, yes, I did see those. But, you know, he was really kind and maybe he had a tough time in his life. And she seemed like, oh, are you also racist? And I was like, I can't do this. You know, I can't stay at Goodwill right now and and I also felt exhausted. I was like, this is actually overwhelming for me. Like, I don't know how to get into this with you. I am trying to practice like loving everyone. And I'm trying to practice understanding that people that I disagree with are still people and that they still have a valid perspective. And that's very hard. And I literally sometimes, like in that instance, I was like, I don't know what the right thing to do is here. I don't want you to think that I am a certain way. And yet, what way am I? I need to be in alignment with my morals. What do you think about the idea of loving everyone equally? How do you approach that?
Well, yeah, I think the way you said you're trying to approach it is a great way to approach it. I think that's a great way to look at it, and it is very tough.
It's really hard.
You know, you see someone with White Lives Matter tattooed on their neck, and that immediately draws some conclusions in your mind about that person for sure.
Yeah, like immediately, you know, and then I have to check myself.
Yeah. But I think also, like you said, you know, if you knew that man's story, like there's a series of events or decisions or whatever it was that led him to be who he is, and
right.
Maybe you'd be in the exact same place as him if you had experienced those exact same things.
Right.
So I think that's one thing I try to think about is if you knew everyone's full story through and through, like they know it, like you would probably have a little more grace or compassion or understanding as to why they are the way they are now. And
yeah,
I think that can help you get past that and kind of see people for people who are living humans' lives and have different stories than you and are in different places. And but yeah, it is tough. It is very tough to get past things like that and love everyone. It's the toughest thing.
It's really tough, Tyler. It's so tough. And I think like the more I feel personally sort of at this moment in my life, especially as we launched this show, and I find my voice in exploring the topics that I am fascinated by, which are largely around just humanity and human consciousness and connection. I find myself like right now at not a crossroads, but like a knot almost, where I've lived a lot of my life and I was maybe born this way, or maybe it was because of my childhood, who knows, but very, very empathetic and very compassionate. And I saw everybody as inherently good. And that was just clear in my mind. And then I got older, and especially after 2020, when I really understood my country in a really different way. I mean, there have been different eras. Trump coming into office was challenging. And I don't want to get lost on politics or any sort of, topic that isn't like, I want to stay on this sort of human to human narrative. However, I found myself like really losing that sense of people are good. I really found myself like in a divorce from an ideology that I didn't want. Like I was like, this ideology is leaving me, and I'm like, please stay, but I don't know how to make it stay because I saw so much ugliness in the world and in human nature, and in particular in ways that I'm like, that seems so unneeded. Like, why is that? Why is that happening? But I find myself seeking to try to understand why it's happening, and I find that is not a popular line of inquiry. People don't, and I want to be careful, but I am finding people do not want to ask questions or have an open mind or endeavor to understand each other, because it's easier to be divisive and it's easier to to have like one idea, I'm this and you're this, and we're on opposite sides of this line. And if you come over here, I'm going to sock you in the face, unless you change your mind and you're on my side of the line agreeing with me, instead of trying to understand that there is fundamental validity. Like, I sometimes get scared to even say like, well, maybe there's a reason why this person has a White Lives Matter tattoo. And maybe we could think about that reason and understand it, because I don't want somebody to draw a conclusion about me. And yet I think that is, so I'm in this sort of like catch-22 of like, you need to understand everyone, but you also do have to have boundaries. It's complicated.
It is. And yeah, definitely, like you were saying, it's easier to put people in a box and put a label on them and say, that's you.
Yeah.
It's much simpler
than
yeah, peeling back the layers and trying to truly get to know them for who they might be deeper down. So yeah, I think that's definitely the tendency these days, is to draw lines and put people in boxes and say, I know you, I know who you are, without actually trying to get to know you or even being curious about what else there might be to you. It's an immediate like, yeah, this is you. I know your type.
Right. I know your type, the generalization.
Yeah, the generalization. And of course there's some truth to stereotypes and whatnot, but they're far from everything.
Yeah. And I think it's a real loss that when we generalize. I just read Go Set a Watchman. Have you read that book?
I haven't, no.
It's really good. It's Harper Lee's, actually her first novel, but she wrote To Kill a Mockingbird.
Okay.
Have you read that one?
Yes.
Yeah, classic. Everyone's read that one. And that one was published first. And To Go Set a Watchman, I finished it like 2 days ago, she is coming back to Alabama, her hometown. And I think it's like the 60s, like late 60s. And she is Scout, the main character, who Harper Lee kind of based on herself. And she's realizing that her city is racist. And she's like, oh my God, I didn't see this. I didn't understand this. And she's seeing her dad have, this Atticus, this incredible representation of all things good and all things just, who defended an African-American man in a rape trial, sitting on a committee that's fighting to maintain segregation. And she's like, how is this happening? And without giving away the book, it's a really, really honest look at why people think what they think, and that you can't just write people off as bad people because they think something that you believe is wrong. You still have to understand them, because they are your dad, and they are your brother, or they are the guy you thought you were going to marry, or they are your neighbor, or they're still people in your network. And our network is really big, and we create these like false lines around it, being based on what we believe and what we don't believe. And I was so impressed with her bravery, because it's really brave to be like, here are these people who are promoting something that is, in my opinion, wrong. It's not right, and it ought not to happen. But why? But asking why, and asking them, why do you need this? Why is it so important to you? Yeah, it matters. I'm sure that's what Jesus would do, but it's hard. It really is really, really difficult. And I don't know if you struggle with it as much as I do, but, and maybe I just love being liked or having everybody get along, but it is complicated, to not take a side sometimes, but to still have a stance. And how do you do that? How do you approach knowing what you think is right, but not taking a side?
Oh man, knowing what I think is right. It's hard not to take a side. I guess I think part of it is, for me at least, is trying to get past that kind of barrier of caring what people think about me. For example, if you bumped into someone with White Lives Matter tattooed on their neck, like you did,
right,
then if you were to go grab coffee with that person, hang out with them, like people who saw you might
put two and two together,
lop you into that box as well, right? And I think for me, it's like getting past that barrier. Like, who cares if people lop you into that box? Like, it really doesn't matter what they think. It's about loving this person that you have crossed paths with, like,
right?
Which is obviously easier said than done, but
yeah, it feels great to say, and it's really scary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think for me, it's a journey of trying to, care less what people think and just be vulnerable and just trust that love will win in the end, I guess.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Yeah, I think that's a really, not caring what people think it's hard. It's a lonely, it can be an act of so much courage to willingly stand up for what you believe in and know that you will be misunderstood. Like, if we were to go have coffee with this person and people are like, oh, Tyler and Jane are like super racist. And we're like, we're not, but you probably won't come ask us that question. So you will now that thought of, that perspective, that reputation exists in the world for us. And that's hard to be like, what do I care more about? How I'm perceived, or what I'm actually doing. And being fully candid, I care about how I'm perceived. And I think that there is a relevance to it. Your voice matters. And so if people perceive you a certain way, you may lose an audience or you may not be heard. But does that outweigh what you do in the moment? It's just really heckin' complicated. And I find myself struggling with it as I think about Jesus and spirituality and compassion and endeavoring to be open and curious. And I see myself fall short or struggle or not know how to live into these really admirable ideals.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I completely feel it. I'm a people pleaser through and through. So that's definitely something that I've tried to combat or at least balance out in my life a bit. Is you can't always please everyone, and that's something that I'm learning and will continue learning for the rest of my life, I think. And
I think it's an ongoing procedure, for sure. Okay, well, that is deep and profound, and I have more deep and profound questions, but moving over to your painting, which is, yes, deep and profound. You've talked about your work, which for listeners or viewers who haven't seen it yet is mostly abstract. I've seen some work that you've done that's more representational, but you do really phenomenal, really spectacular abstract works that do feel full of vitality and energy and soul. And you've referred to them as a representation of you in that moment. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So my approach with painting and creating in general is to be very open and uncontrived and spontaneous and really just create a space to pour life out in, I guess you could say. And that's really what I try to do. I try to kind of go into each painting session with an open mind and an open heart and really just let myself kind of exude onto the canvas and just let whatever is and whatever I'm feeling and receiving in those moments kind of just hopefully flow through the work and show themselves in the piece that I'm creating. So yeah, I think each piece, I spend a lot of time on each piece typically, and it spans the course of weeks and months often. And I think each time I paint, that a little bit of me is coming out onto the canvas into that piece, and that's really how I look at it and feel about it. And that's my hope with it, is that each piece is kind of a part of me, and it is. It's really it's a lot of my focus, a lot of my time, and a lot of my energy is wrapped up in each piece that I create, and that's really how I feel about it.
Do you feel a sense of relief when you paint?
Sometimes, definitely. Sometimes it's a great outpouring, and sometimes it's a great place to get out some negative energies even, and really just express some frustration and some disappointment, and just kind of fuel that through the brush, or
Yeah.
whatever, if that makes sense. And
It makes sense.
so sometimes it's that, sometimes it's a joyous outpouring. Like, it's like, I'm loving this. Like, this is fun. Like, I'm in it. Like, this is awesome.
Working. This is great. Yeah.
This is lively. This is life. Like,
Yeah.
so it definitely, for me, encompasses the whole spectrum of emotions throughout the course, usually, of each piece. I can see all the range of them usually in there through the subtleties, and that's usually how I feel about each piece, is they encompass, everything that I'm feeling during that season and that time of my life.
Yeah. And the nonverbal quality, does that feel comforting to you? The way that it's, you're not writing, you're not speaking. I mean, maybe you are speaking to yourself or to the painting or to God. And I'm sure, of course, you're thinking intermittently, but does it resonate with you that you are communicating with gesture and with color?
It's definitely a different form of communication. Sometimes it is nice to have something to balance it, like some writing or whatnot, and articulate your ideas in more concrete ways like that. But I think there's things that are easier to articulate through something like abstract painting in very non-concrete ways, where they can't really be defined, and it's just this broad general expression, just this outpouring of energy, I guess, and emotion, and less articulate in that sense. And I think that is a great way of kind of me understanding myself and watching myself and how I act throughout the creation process, and just, I guess, how I behave when I don't set out with a concrete direction or a concrete idea of what to express or articulate.
So is there sort of a sense of self-investigation?
Definitely so. I think, I think that's a big part of it for me, is discovering myself and discovering what fits my eye and my vision, and what is meaningful to me, and what feels right, and what energy feels good, and all that sort of stuff. And once again, it's not a concrete investigation. It's very abstract, but for me, life is very abstract. We were talking about our thoughts and our minds. It's very abstract. It's almost chaotic at times. It is.
For sure.
So I think I see a lot of similarities in my creation process, and leaving it open and just letting it evolve and grow as the process goes on, as I do to life. I see it kind of growing and evolving in the same ways that I interact with everyday life. So, yeah.
That's cool. I definitely feel the same way about abstract painting. It seems like it's an opportunity to sort of be in free flow and be surprised by yourself, which is cool. I don't know if there are a lot of other mediums that I've discovered where you can really surprise yourself like that. The act of using color and brush without a clear intention, or maybe with a clear intention, but without a clear destination, the way that if you're, going to paint a hand, you're going to end up with a hand, and maybe decisions you make excite you, but they might not surprise you in the same way that when you paint in the abstract, there's so much space and so much freedom, and you can iterate something that you, that almost feels like it comes from some place other than you, but at the same time can leave you feeling really expressed.
I definitely like to think of it as an exploration, is one word that I use a lot, and not just an exploration of me and my vision, but I guess an exploration of my life as it exists at that time, and what is being created through me even. at that time, and what can be created through me if I open myself up to that possibility. And so it's an exploration for me of all those things, really, I would have to say.
And do you feel like the work that you create when it goes to a home or a gallery carries that impact with it? And is it your hope that the work itself, so charged with all of that circumstance and all of that energy, is an impactful piece for the viewer?
It's definitely my hope. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely hope that, all those things can be subtly perceived through that work, and I think they can. I think my focus, more so than, creating visually striking pieces, is to create meaningful pieces that really feel deep and meaningful. And I think that starts with, creating something that's meaningful to me, and something that I really felt like I had a meaningful creation process with. And I think if I have that, then I think that hopefully exudes itself through the final piece, and I hope people can feel that for sure.
Do you think that I'm thinking about you, being the vessel and doing God's work and painting, and I know that you really channel divinity when you paint. Do you feel like, I guess again, I'm like, do you think this is your way of doing God's work?
I hope so. Yes. And I do believe that for sure. I do believe I've been called to this, and I do see how it fits me and how it works well with my mind and my ambitions. And absolutely, that is my hope with it, that God can show a little piece of himself through me, I guess, is how I think about it. And I don't know how that looks. I don't know how that works.
Right.
But I think just by opening myself up to that possibility, I think he wants to use me for that purpose, and wants to use my work, and wants to speak to people through it. And that's my hope for it, for sure.
I want to talk to you about your faith, because I think that it is, the way I've heard you talk about it in this interview and in conversations that we've had, the few conversations that we've had prior, I'm curious about how you view faith outside of your own. So we could just start there.
Outside of my own faith?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that's a hard question, so, just, I get that it's a hard question.
Yeah, I think faith is faith, and it's a faith that what you feel and believe actually does exist. And it is just that. Sometimes that's all it can be, is faith. Because like I was saying earlier, there's no way to prove God. There's no way to prove these things that
Right.
that I believe, that you believe. There's some things that just can't be proven. And so it does take faith to trust that these things are real, because we believe them to be real. And why do we believe them to be real? What has led us to these beliefs? And it's different for everyone, right? It's different for everyone. And yeah, I think it's a journey. I think oftentimes it's a journey. It's your own journey, and it's a matter of investigating. For me, I was raised in the church and grew up with, like, here's your faith kind of handed to you, like, my parents, this is what we believe, this is what you're going to believe, kind of thing. Like,
Right.
I think you have to go out and find that for yourself, and ask your own questions, and investigate for yourself. And, if you want to find truth, I think you'll find truth. And I think that looks like different things for different people, but, I believe that asking questions is a good thing, not just blindly following anything is a good thing. Like,
Yeah.
everything, I think, should be question to a certain extent, not to an extent where you can never firmly believe in it, but
Right.
I think asking questions is great, and I think everyone at some point has to go on a journey of finding their faith, finding out what they believe truly deep down, like, what do I believe, and what is truth to me, and what is absolute truth, if you will. Like, I think it's a journey and a process of finding your faith, I guess, and sticking to it, having the confidence and the faith to stick to it and truly believe in it.
Mm-hmm. And you feel like it can look different, totally different, and still, like, for example, I believe that there is some kind of mystery. There is. I believe in a lot of things. I'm pretty open-minded. I think that if, what you tell me and what you talk to me about God, I don't not believe it. I believe it. I believe that you believe it. I see the purpose of it. I also believe in the experiences that I have had, and I believe in not everything, but kind of. And I believe in the value of believing. I think that if someone came to me and explained their belief system and it was really different than mine, again, if they're like, and I, kill virgins, like, and that's part of it, and I, or whatever it is, that's a really extreme example, but obviously there's like moral queries or moral struggles between faiths. And I think that that's a hard topic, but the idea of believing in something, to me, feels worthwhile and worth doing. And I appreciate when people do it, even if it looks different from what I believe. Is that a position that you also have?
I think so. I think I'm also very open-minded, or at least I try to be.
Yeah.
I think we all should be. Like we were touching on earlier, everyone has different stories. Everyone has been raised in different ways, and
Mm-hmm.
That is what forms our belief systems, is our experiences, the way the world around us has shaped us.
Right.
So yes, I absolutely believe that there's tons of different beliefs out there, and I don't know if I think there's a wrong or a right one necessarily. Like I said, everyone's different, and everyone has been led to what they believe in different ways. I think, I guess, what I would add on to what you were saying is I would still encourage people to, investigate and continue investigating, and never close your mind off to, like, this is what I believe and I'm never changing it. Like, no
Right.
matter what is revealed to me or what experiences happen, like, I'm stuck on this. Like, this is the end. Like,
Right.
no. So I think I definitely believe in keeping an open mind and, yeah, just being open to what is being shown to you and continuing to investigate and search and grow and get deeper.
Is that something that's shared by your family? Like, if you were to say, I don't participate in like the Christian structure that I'm, currently in, would that be a radical decision in your family structure, or would that be like, okay, yeah, like, we love you and you believe whatever you believe?
That would be a pretty radical decision in my family structure for sure. Yeah, my mom was pretty conservative
Mm-hmm.
when I was growing up, and I think that was hard for me sometimes. Is there's a lot of rules and very much kind of an earner's mindset, I guess. Like, you kind of earn the grace of God by how well you behave and if you follow the rules and stuff like that. And I think that was really hard for me. So I think when I was able to kind of start my own journey and go try to discover my faith for myself, I think having a much more open mind about things really helped me kind of grow and move forward in my faith, as opposed to this vision that I kind of grew up with of, rules and doing right and wrong in this sort of black and white kind of reality.
Yeah. Are you able to be the open-minded, more gray area version of yourself with your family, or does it still feel like you have to protect that?
I think so. I think my family has grown as well and
That's cool.
opened their minds up a bit more than when I was young.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do like to see that, and I definitely feel like I can be more honest and truthful and have deeper, more genuine conversations with my family now, and it can be hard to express those things for sure, and it can be hard to change your mindset and hard to let your mindset change, I guess, and
Yeah.
hard to break out of these norms that were ingrained in your mind at a young age, but yeah, I do feel like I can be myself, and yeah, I think my family accepts that, and they still have certain expectations for me, I think, but
Like what?
just in terms of a Christian perspective, I would say, there's still a certain expectation of what that looks like to live a Christian lifestyle, and I guess I hold a bit of that too, but I don't know, I am very open-minded, and I think living a Christian lifestyle looks different for everyone, and what's right for one person can be wrong for another person, and so on. And
Right. Yeah. It sounds challenging. Sounds like a little dogmatic, or maybe quite dogmatic, but the core of the faith still resonates with you.
it does, yeah, definitely. I really always just go back to the life that Jesus lived and the example of Jesus, and his example was, he was not religious at all. He really rebelled against the religion at the time and really just lived fully into the purpose he was called to and gave his life to it. And that's the example I try to
Follow.
go back to, and that really is the core of the Christian religion, and should be the core, though the church has definitely distorted that, and the perspective of that has been distorted over time, and there's a lot of Christians that don't live that, and I don't always live that at times. It's hard, right? And it's hard to get past these things that we set in place, and religion can be good. It can be very practical. It can be a great practice that can help you grow closer to God and grow in love, but at the core of the faith that I was raised with is Jesus, and that's really the example that I always try to go back to, and I try not to complicate it more than that.
Okay. Well, here's a question.
Okay.
This was my first question that I am asking now, like an hour in. But what would you say was or has been your biggest struggle as an artist?
Biggest struggle as an artist, I would say specifically as an abstract artist, and I know this is true for many other abstract artists as well, is just believing that what you're doing is meaningful and what you should be doing, because abstract art is unquantifiable, and there's no direct measure of success. So it really takes a deeply rooted belief that these crazy chaotic paintings, or whatever they are, these unquantifiable paintings, are meaningful and can add value to your life and people's lives that see them, and to the world in general. So I think that's been the biggest struggle, and will probably always be the biggest struggle in my craft, is just continually believing and being confident that what I'm doing and what I'm working on is very meaningful and valuable to people, even though it's this weird abstract thing that there's no real metric for success of.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there are metrics for success with abstract at this point, because we've known abstract art for I don't know what, the last like 70 years or something, maybe a little bit more than that. Like, really had it in the contemporary art landscape. Rendering, technique, color, there are all these things that can be considered successful in a piece of abstract art. but I understand what you mean. There's been, there's such a residual like French Academy overlord of like, well, if it doesn't look like something, what is the purpose of it? Or if it looks like a poorly rendered version of something, then it's actually unsuccessful, versus the nature of chaos that is abstract art being inherently valuable. Yeah, I get it. Do you ever feel that it's indulgent?
What do you mean by indulgent?
Well, that you do it for yourself, but it doesn't, you question its value once it's, other than for you.
Yeah,
But you've seen
I
such good reception. I mean, your work's amazing. So you can't doubt like that it is well received. So
Sure, yeah. No, I see what you're saying, and I think to a certain extent, I think you have to do it for yourself, first of all, to a certain extent. And, my hope, of course, is that it has an effect on other people and is meaningful and valuable to other people and can inspire and move and whatnot. But I think in order, for a painting to exude joy to someone else, for example, who sees it, I think it first has to be joyful for me creating it. And so in that sense, I guess it is a little self-indulgent, but at the same time, it's
necessarily
not,
so.
and also necessarily so, yeah.
So it sounds like that isn't really a struggle for you then. I mean, it is, but it seems almost paradoxical because you do see the value in painting your reality. And it is very abstract in its final expression, and people love it.
Well, yeah, I would say I'm my own harshest critic for sure. But it's also, it can be self-indulgent, but that can also be painful at times. Sometimes it's a struggle and it's not always joyful, and that struggle is what exudes itself and has an impact on people. And so I think, yeah, some of my darkness, if you will, shows itself through some of my work, and that's inevitable. And I think in that sense, it is not necessarily a positive experience for me, if you will, in the creation process, but I think that's all part of it. It's ebbs and flows, and yeah, I guess I try to focus less on how well received it is and more on like what I'm envisioning and pursuing, and just creating something meaningful is, yeah, ultimately the goal. I don't know if that...
What would you say to an abstract artist who was trying to find their footing? What advice would you offer? It doesn't have to be an abstract artist, but because you work specifically in abstract.
Yeah, I would say that just do you. Like, create what is true to you. Create whatever you want to create. Like, there's really no parameters on what a piece of art has to be. Though we all have this, kind of premonition in our mind of what art should be or what it should look like. I would say no. I'd try to free yourself of those things and create what's true to you, and create what brings you joy, and create what you find meaningful and intriguing and inspiring. Create that and continue pursuing that and diving deeper into that, and stick with it and be patient and don't try to jump ahead. Take the steps and focus on creating what is deeply meaningful and true to you, because ultimately that's all you can express is you and your experience. And it is a human expression on a general level for sure, but it starts by expressing you and what's true to you and the way you see the world.
So really following authenticity.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be my hope.
Yeah.
I don't think there's enough artists out there who truly let themselves do that. I think think there's a certain recipe for success that artists tend to and try to follow, and I think part of that is finding what people receive well, and
creating more of that.
I want to push past that. Is really my goal as an artist, is not creating what people receive well, but creating what's authentic to me, even if it's not well received, like creating what I find to be the most meaningful and beautiful. And that's, I think artists get stuck on like what sells, and to a certain extent, that's kind of the nature of the art world, is you have to make money and you have to sell artwork. But I want to be able to push past that and create something that's meaningful, not something that's going to sell well, and not let that be a deciding factor in the creative process.
Is that why because I know that you work in graphic design as well as being a painter, is that part of why you don't focus entirely on painting as a form of self-support? Because it would necessitate that you sell work, which would necessitate production to the critic's pleasure. Is that part of why you keep it as not your primary source of income?
I am definitely grateful to be in that position, for sure. I do think that's an advantage to my creative process in the art world, is having another source of income to where I don't have to turn my art career into a business, and I can just let it be this free-flowing, uninhibited creative thing that doesn't necessarily have to
make you any money,
make me any money or income. So I am grateful to be in that position, and I do consider it an advantage, for sure, like a creative advantage.
Yeah. Would you give up ever selling a piece again to paint the way that feels the most authentic to you?
It's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to think so. Of course, it feels good when you sell a piece and when someone truly resonates with it, but that is my hope when I do sell a piece. It's a hope that someone really resonates with it and it's truly meaningful to them. It's not just something beautiful that is going to look pretty on their wall. That's my hope, is to
paint something that moves someone.
Something that moves someone, for sure. And yeah.
So maybe you wouldn't have to sacrifice like that, because the odds of you painting so authentically and having nobody moved by your paintings are pretty slim. I bet you'd sell at least one or two more paintings.
I like to think so.
Yeah. But you do feel committed to, and perhaps this is advice that you would give other painters, producing something or many somethings, but painting from your own impetus and not to please a buyer or a critic or a gallery, because that's the reason why you do the work, is so that you can produce something that's like completely Tyler.
Absolutely, yeah. It is a hard goal sometimes, but that is definitely my goal with art, is to create completely authentic, uninhibited expression. That's really my goal with it. And yeah, I see other artists that do it, but I would love to see more. And it's a hard thing, right? Because yes, like all these things jump into your mind and affect your vision of what a piece of art should be. Like these thoughts like, oh, people are going to like this, like I should do it this way or whatever, or I should add this color because
people love this color.
Right. I've loved it in my past works, like I should do this again, like
that killer red that you use that I love.
Exactly.
Now you're like, should I get the red?
That influences me going forward. Absolutely it does.
Right.
And for me it's taking all those things with a grain of salt. Like it should influence me, and it will, and that's part of what's shaping me and shaping my artistic vision. But I want to keep it completely open going forward, and not let that be 100% of the influence, and not let the style of works that are selling be 100% of the influence, or whatever it is. And
right.
I think that's a constant journey of freeing yourselves of those thoughts and those preconceived notions, and truly creating. I think it's easy to get to a point of producing what you've already created in the past, and
right.
you're not really creating anymore, you're recreating. And
yeah,
I want to keep exploring and keep pushing the creative boundaries and keep growing and watching my work grow with me.
Do you feel like painting has saved your life in any way?
You could say that. Yeah. Oh man, I do feel like it's been a saving kind of career path for me, for sure. It fits me so well, and it fits my kind of ambitions for life so well, and it is just this thing that I found that I can really just grow and help grow and be patient with, and I really do consider it a lifelong pursuit, and I've considered it that since the day that I started calling myself an artist. And
which was
about 9 years ago. Yeah. December 2015.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know where I would be without this, outlet that I'm extremely passionate about to pursue for the rest of my life. It certainly has given me a ton of hope and just a real zest for life, and a passion, and it has assisted all those things 100%.
Has it given you, well, let's see, actually I have two questions, so let me just slow my mouth down to match my brain or whatever. Okay, so, well, two things that I want to touch on. The first is that you mentioned earlier in our episode that you had a manic episode. Did painting help you with that episode? Did it help you to come back? Or was that a separate journey without painting playing a factor?
So that's kind of a funny story. To a certain extent, it was the discovery that I wanted to pursue art and that it was my call is partially what spurred the manic episode in me.
Interesting.
Which is doesn't sound good up front, and it
I think
from
that's
that
great.
from that kind of thought process, it could look like painting is a bad thing for me. But it was other things in my life that also attributed to this manic episode. And
would you say what those things were?
Yes. So it was, in my opinion, a combination of drugs, alcohol, and my ego.
Sure.
Are the three biggest attributing factors, is what I would have to say. So yeah,
those are good factors. They'll trigger mania. I think that my manic episode was fueled by no alcohol because I wasn't drinking, but drugs and my ego for sure.
Bad combination.
Yeah. Feels good in the moment.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm the coolest, and then you're like, hang on.
Yeah. So at the time, I was definitely in a kind of explorative phase in my life. I was just out of college and was working full time as a graphic designer, and just wasn't very fulfilled in it. Just didn't feel very purposed in that, and felt underutilized creatively. So I was really searching for my purpose in life, I guess you could say. And it was one night in December of 2015 that I kind of just locked myself in my room and went on this creative journey with the help of some substances,
medicinal substances, right. Yep.
Really just went on this creative journey. But in that moment, I had just the most profound experience, and it was in that moment that I just saw this vision for a career as an artist and what that pursuit could look like and how beautiful and valuable it could be. And I really just saw it all kind of unfolded right there, and it just clicked in my brain, like, why wouldn't you pursue this? Like, this is meant for you. Like, this is your call, like kind of thing. And it's kind of a messy story because it was assisted by drugs and partially induced by that. And
I'm just going to jump in for a second here. Do you feel, because I believe that the assistance of drugs is actually a really valuable thing if done appropriately. You can absolutely abuse drugs, and I have overused drugs in the past. But I have also had experiences assisted by drugs very similar to the one you're talking about that I wouldn't trade in for the world. I mean, changes in my life that have led me to the woman I am today and the person I am today. Do you feel the same way, or do you think that drug use is inherently negative?
I don't think it's inherently negative. I wouldn't encourage it, I don't think, unless you're able to do it responsibly, but I think that's very hard to do. In this case, I did not do it responsibly, and I like to think that I would have found this path and been courageous enough to follow this call without the assistance of drugs. And I believe that I would have eventually, but at that time it did push me to jump right into this in this really rash and unresponsible and manic way.
Right.
So yeah, it was after that moment that I was like, I'm going to be an artist. And I was just so invigorated by that finding in that moment that I started getting egotistical, and I just pursued it full-heartedly. I quit my job, and like literally the next day I went in and quit my job and was like, I'm going to be an artist now. I'm not a graphic designer anymore.
I'm out of here. Right.
So it was this whole kind of spiraling of like, I'm doing this now, and it did turn into this manic episode and really a very dark time in my life. And I think without drugs, I would have found this call in more healthy ways. But that's my story, and that's what happened. And there are some parts about it that I do regret. I was, scaring my family a lot and not being responsible and hurting the people around me to a certain extent, and I do regret that. But, the more I have advanced on this path and stuck with it, the more I know that it's for me and that this was the right call despite the darkness and the messiness that it started in. Like, this is where I'm supposed to be, and it all happened for a reason, I guess, and I've learned my lessons and I've grown from that, and it is what it is at this point. But going back to that, I guess I can't encourage or discourage.
Right.
I would always discourage the drug use. I think it's a shortcut, and it's cheating a little bit, and it's not completely natural. And I don't know where I stand on that. I honestly don't. I think everyone has to make their own decisions in that regard, but I wouldn't encourage it. I would encourage that you find these things the natural way and find it by going deeper within yourself rather than using external substances to elicit that deepness.
But what about, like, I mean, we have to kind of get into like the granulars of what a drug is. Like psilocybin, for example, is a natural substance. Do you consider that if someone is or ayahuasca or peyote or marijuana, like any plant produced psychedelic or any plant that produces a psychoactive effect, do you think those are shortcuts or cheating?
Yeah.
You do.
But I can't discourage or encourage them either way because I have used them.
And they helped you.
I'm here, and I'm grateful to be here. It's a slippery slope, I will say that.
I see.
It is a slippery slope, and I would be careful with all of these things is all I would say to anyone.
I think that's a great PSA. I definitely agree that being careful with anything with a psychoactive component is extremely wise. But I do feel that there are functionalities and services that those medicines serve that I think have been explored and appreciated in so many indigenous practices and in practices of spirituality. And I am a firm believer in those things, with the caveat that you can abuse them the same way you can overeat or overplay video games, or over whatever, become addicted to sex. You can abuse anything. And then you can also use something in an intelligent way. So I see what you're saying. As a third party recipient of your narrative, it's clear to me that though it was a dark low point, was a vital part of your story. And even the darkness of it was necessary. Even the suffering and the harming of your family and the things that nobody wants to go through those things. But without that, you miss a depth that I think is important for people to have. So from the outside, hearing you, I see the value in it, but I can't speak to whether you would have found it, on your own. I'm sure you would have. It seems like this is your path, regardless of any sort of substance you might imbibe. It's not like because you took a drug, it showed you something that wasn't already there. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes because we are so linear in our thinking, because we're humans and we fall into systems of thought, and something like a psychoactive element can help us to sort of reset and unblock, because we are very boundaried in our thinking sometimes. And even graduating college and being a graphic designer and feeling unfulfilled but not understanding why, that's a rut people can get into until they're 50 or 60 or 70. And then they have much more adverse effects than, But again, I'm not condoning nor I'm, to use your phrase, neither encouraging nor discouraging. I think that everybody inherently knows what's best for them, and if they don't, that they'll learn it. Everyone has their own path to walk, I think, with substance.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Yes, I agree. I agree with a lot of that.
I guess just to continue on my soapbox for 1 second, I don't want you to feel like that wasn't real, because it sounds really real to me and it sounds really valuable, and like it was for you and a part of your process. So I hope selfishly that you do see that and that you don't think of yourself as having made a mistake, or that like inadvertently led to the right thing. I think that you went the right way. So that's all I'll say.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I will just add, I neither condone nor,
discondone,
I neither encourage nor discourage. But I will say that, given my circumstance, I'm not sure I would have made it if I didn't have the friends and family around me that I did. So I'm just very grateful to have the support system that I did at that time. And if I didn't have that, it was a slippery slope that I was on. And
yeah.
So I'm grateful for that. And I'll just add that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I get that. I really feel that. I understand that. And it's nice in moments when we are outside of ourselves and outside of our own control that we're not alone. Like, thank goodness. Because it's not a guarantee. Yeah. It's not always the case that we're not on our own. Yep. Well, I'm glad you had your friends and family too. So, okay. So that was December 8th, 2015?
I'm not sure of the exact date.
Oh, but I just made that up.
December 2015.
December 2015. Okay. And here we are, like 10 years later. And so, what was that journey like? You quit your job and you just started painting sort of right away? When did you really start painting the way that you paint now?
Yeah, I guess it was right away.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I went to the art store the next day and got some supplies and dove right in. And
do you have your first piece? Do you have that piece?
Oh, what was my first piece? I have some of the... Yes, I do have it.
I'd love to see it.
I don't think I'll show it. But
personal. Yeah.
It was... it's not great.
Got it. Got it.
But yeah, I do still have it. And yeah, I have the piece that I was sketching on when I had that experience and really decided to become an artist.
Cool.
But yeah, I dove right in, and my style is much different now than that first piece for sure. And I've come a long ways since then and learned a lot of technical aspects of painting and whatnot since then. So,
How did you learn those? Just through doing, or did you take classes?
I had taken a few classes in college just with the graphic design degree. There was, a few painting and drawing classes in there and whatnot. I also grew up, drawing a lot with my mom and stuff. We would have drawing sessions and creative sessions when I was a kid and growing up. And, that's what really kind of got me into being kind of artistic in the first place. And what led me to choosing a major of a graphic design. And
right.
So it's all kind of connected in that way. And I had not a ton of, professional training, I guess, in painting. It's mostly self-taught, but I've always kind of dabbled around.
Did you just improve technique over time with just repetition?
Yeah, I think so. Just,
because you do have an
myself.
impressive technique, and you use oil, which is the most challenging medium, I think, and you use it well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, my technique has definitely grown a lot over these 9 years, and I've definitely gotten, I would say a better painter just technically over that time for sure. And I have put an emphasis on, trying to be better in that regard and trying to learn and studying color and teaching myself some of these things in not very rigorous ways, but just, trying to grow and get better.
Yeah. I'm
a little curious about your artistic background.
You're turning the tables. My painting background?
Yeah.
That's a great question. What a great question.
I guess not even your background, but just your vision for it and why you paint.
Why I paint, yeah. Oh man, that's a good question. I don't know if I've always I've always been really artistic and creative. Like anything, I love anything beautiful, anything made. I just have a magpie's eye, or I'm just drawn to things that are that feel lively and beautiful. But I started painting, I think it was like 2017 I started painting because I was really sad. And I remember I painted a painting that I still have, actually, that's on my Instagram somewhere. I'll send it to you. And it's just a face in watercolor with like a tear. And it's nice. It's a style that I've cultivated, a kind of a line work style that I do. But I remember being like, oh, that felt really good. And it felt, I'm a writer first and foremost. I write a lot of poetry and prose, and it felt like a different direction for me to express myself in a way that just felt like way less boundaried. Words can be either this font of expressivity, or they can feel really constricting to me. And sometimes when I'm trying to express, the bigger something is, the more constricting words feel. I'm like, I cannot begin to, I would need 1,000 pages to communicate this in word. But if I paint it, I can paint it on a canvas. Give me a 10 by 10, that sounds awesome. But I could maybe even get it out on a small little piece of paper, because there's so much space to color and gesture. So it just kind of was therapeutic for me. It would help me. And throughout my life, I have felt compelled to paint. And I do. And I haven't taken it very seriously until, I don't even know, we were interviewing another artist in Bolinas a few months ago, and he's a phenomenal painter as well. And he was like, or Micah said something like, oh, Jane paints. And I was like, oh, well, and he was like, well, we got in the car and he was like, why did you do that? Why are you being so, like quiet and non, and I guess I just hadn't really thought of it as, I think it's beautiful. I mean, when you talk about painting for yourself, like I don't show people my work and have them be like, oh my God, Jane, oh my God, you're an incredible painter. Normally I show people my work if they, come over, see it and they're like, oh, that's pretty cool. But to me, I know why I painted each one. I know what I was experiencing at that moment. And it helped me to like validate it's or to see it. Almost like the way I can see, it's like getting a picture of my brain, like my brain at that moment, or my neural state at that moment of transition or pain or insight or wisdom. I can put it onto a canvas and be like, that maybe looks a bit like what my neural structure was when I was going through that moment. And yeah, I don't know. I think maybe in another world I would just be a painter, and I would paint and live by the ocean or something. And that's a fantasy, but I don't, I'll probably always paint, I think. And we design merchandise, which is cool. So my paintings will be on OtherWise merchandise. Sick. Yeah, which will be sick. But yeah, I deeply love it. And I'd really like to get better at it. When you talk about technique and color study and even mixing, like, or my God, even like mastering the palette knife or mastering like a certain brush, those things take time and they take attention. But I would love to continue advancing, because I think there's a language in abstract work that is so relieving when you're like, I'm fluent in that right now. I'm speaking that, and it's everything that I need to be coming through me is coming through me, and I can see it. And that's a great feeling. I do feel that way sometimes when I write poetry. It just kind of like comes out, and I'm like, oh, great, that's great. That all got out, and now it's out there, and so yeah, that's my long-winded answer.
Wow, that's well said.
Oh, thanks.
It is.
Thank you. Yeah. So, do you find divine inspiration in other aspects of your life aside from painting? Is there another?
Yeah. I would say most of all, probably just being in nature and observing nature and how it moves and grows and is just in constant motion, but often peaceful, rhythmic motion. And
yeah,
I think that's probably the most inspiring thing to me, other than painting, and that's probably where I see the divine the most, I would say.
In nature.
In nature. Yeah, I think also I would say just in silence and in meditation and prayer at times, I often feel the closest. Those three things I would have to say are where I experience the divine the most: painting and nature and just silence,
prayer,
taking time.
Yeah. What would you, if you could give the world something, some piece of wisdom or some kind of gift, insight, what is that?
Oh man, I don't know if you want my insight.
Well, I do. I'm explicitly asking for it.
Well, I think sharing your story and being vulnerable is the biggest gift that anyone can give the world, I think. So yeah, I try to do that, and I think when we all do that, we give the world this broader perspective of what it looks like to be a human, and that helps us see each other's stories and see each other deeper down. And so I would say don't be afraid to share. We're all going through the same things. We experience the same highs and the same lows to a certain extent, and I think when we can share and be real about those things, it's really valuable for everyone.
Vulnerability. Honesty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I think that's good. I think that's right. I think Brene Brown agrees with you, and she's an authority on these things. So.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, that's great. I think that helps us to your point, relate a little bit better. instead of assuming or generalizing, but to just be vulnerable, be willing to be vulnerable, and to be willing to see other people as vulnerable too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
definitely.
Well, I have no more questions, Tyler, but thank you for taking the time and for being vulnerable with me and sharing your story. And before I let you go, do a plug, anywhere we can find you, that kind of thing, your upcoming shows, etc.
Sure, I'll plug.
Plug away.
I rent a studio at the Gem Center for the Arts. We're really trying to elevate the place and
It's beautiful.
Turn it into a real creative hub for the valley here. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And your website is
tycrabb.com.
Tycrabb.com. Okay, 2 B's.
2 B's.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tyler. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jane. It's been a pleasure. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much again for tuning in. Hopefully there was something in that episode that inspired you that you can take with you throughout the week. Please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share this with a friend or family member. They might find it useful also. If you want to learn more about us, you can do so at OtherWiseWithJaneHarvey.com, and be sure to sign up for our newsletter, Music by Dash Positive. And if you want this episode in audio form, you can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.